The May sun was going low over Osprey Lane when I pulled the last cardboard box from the back of my new neighbor's SUV. She looked up, handed me one wrapped in thick tape, and let her fingers rest on mine a beat longer than she needed to. I smiled. Careful. This street's quiet enough to keep you single forever. She smiled back, voice level. Unless you change that. I stood still in the gold light, not sure why something very old had just tilted inside my chest. That joke was the first sentence of a conversation that had already begun 8 years earlier. Only one of us knew. My name is Damon Ashford, 34 years old, head coach at Bayshore Community Aquatic Center in Sarasota, Florida. My father, Ellis, was the man who taught me to swim. He died the summer I turned 16, and every early morning at the pool since then has, in some quiet way, been a conversation with him. I live alone. Osprey Lane, a small one-story house with a screened porch and a mango tree in the back that drops fruit no one picks up. 3 years now, since Talia and I signed the papers. We never had children, which the divorce lawyer said would make things simpler, and which nobody ever tells you is its own kind of loneliness. She moved back to Miami. I kept the house, I kept the public pool, and I kept the habit of getting into the water at 5 in the morning before anyone else does. My days have a shape you could set a watch by. 5 o'clock, I swim laps under a ceiling of humming lights. 6:30, I unlock the door for the adult beginners, mostly people in their 40s and 50s who never learned right the first time. 8 o'clock, the kids come in loud, and I stop being tired. Noon, if it's a Tuesday, I sit in the boardroom and pitch the same proposal I've been pitching for a year, an adaptive swim program. Adults with water trauma, veterans carrying things the water helps loosen, wheelchair users who deserve a lane too. The board calls it ambitious. I call it a debt to my father. I have a whistle in the pocket of my windbreaker, heavy metal, cold even in Florida. I have a smell of chlorine on my hands that a shower doesn't argue with. I have a bulletin board at the classroom door where I wrote what my father used to say. Water isn't cruel. Only breath that forgets itself is. Next door, for 11 years, was a small yellow house that belonged to Miss Estelle Halley. Piano teacher, never married. She kept her porch light on for the kids walking home from her lessons, even when she had no lessons that evening. She died in March. I went to the funeral in a jacket I hadn't worn since my father's. There was a niece in the front row I had never met, someone who came in from out of town and sat straight-backed through the whole service. Nobody introduced me. I sat 2 rows behind and left before the reception. There were small cracks in my life I didn't like to look at too long. Talia still texted every few months. It always began the same way. Damon, your mother. My mother is in Jacksonville, in a small apartment near my aunt, and she has been unwell for about a year in a way the doctors keep almost naming. Talia used my mother the way people use a photograph to get inside a locked house. There was Carla Doss, who ran an outreach program at Bayshore for a long time and still lingered around the front desk after her contract shifted. She had started asking me questions in a sweet, careful tone that didn't belong on her. Damon, do you keep in touch with old students? Just curious. I paused a half-second, and I said no. I don't have the time. She smiled, like the answer was a checkbox on a form only she could see. And a week before the box in the SUV, I noticed a charcoal crossover parked in front of Estelle's house at dusk. Brake lights on for maybe 30 seconds, then off. I figured it was a real estate agent. It wasn't. On the shelf above my headboard, there is a gap the exact width of a hardcover book. A gap I have not filled in 8 years. The book was my father's copy of a swimmer's guide, the margins covered in his blue pen. I lent it to a student sometime in the spring of 2017. She was supposed to bring it back when she didn't need it anymore. She never did. I never asked. I told myself I had let go. I thought I knew every piece of this house. What I did not know was that the most valuable thing I had ever given away had just been driven up my street in a cardboard box and had stopped about 15 steps from my front door. The first morning after she moved in, I heard a coffee grinder through the fence. My kettle was already on. I stood in my own kitchen listening to hers, as if I had been invited to a small private concert I did not know I had wanted. Then footsteps and a mug pushed between the slats. For helping with the boxes, she introduced herself the way people who work with strangers all day introduced themselves, calm and unhurried. Nora Halley, Estella's niece. She said she was taking a leave from her job in Atlanta to sort out the house. I did not ask what job. That was the shape of us at the beginning. 2 labels across a fence. The new neighbor, the coach next door. That same morning, after she went back inside, if you were the invisible third party in the kitchen with her, you would have seen her set her mug down beside the box on top of the stack, the one still taped shut. She lifted the flap. Her fingertips brushed a hardcover spine that had a nick along the top edge and blue ink bleeding faintly through the cloth. She almost lifted it out, then she closed the flap, set a book of dishes on top, and went to find a broom. The second week, the top step of her porch went soft in the middle. I heard the crack from my kitchen when she stepped on it wrong. I came over with a hammer, 2 planks of pine, and a bag of galvanized nails. I told her it would take 20 minutes. It took 45, because the joist underneath had rotted too. She stood closer than she needed to while I was on my knees. I could smell coffee on her and something else, faint, clean, warm, vanilla maybe. Her voice was quiet. "You're sure you're just the neighbor, and not somebody's husband?" I laughed. "Divorced 3 years, long enough for a porch step to warp." She nodded and did not say anything else, and I liked that about her. Most people would have asked a follow-up question. She let the sentence lie where I put it. Later that week, she asked me a strange question. She was watching me put my tools back into the box, and she said, "Did your father ever keep books he wrote in? Like, in the margins?" I stopped. Most people don't ask a question like that. I said yes, my father wrote in the margins of every book he loved, in blue ballpoint. She said, "My aunt mentioned you. She said your father must have been a good man." I believed her. My father and Miss Estelle had liked each other. She used to bring him lemonade in the summer. The third week, I offered her a guest pass at Bayshore. Off hours, after the kids' class had gone home, when the water was still and the lane lines were the only thing moving. I told myself it was a neighborly thing. I stood on the deck while she got in. She sat on the edge for a full minute first, hands flat on the tile, and then she slid in the way people who have taught themselves to trust the water slide in. She swam like a stranger for the first 10 feet, and then something switched. 4-count breath. Left, right, left, glide. Not the standard rhythm you learn in a manual. It was the rhythm my father had drawn on a napkin the first time he tried to teach me. I stood there with my whistle in my hand and forgot for a second where I was. When she climbed out at the shallow end, I said, "You swim like someone who was taught right." She looked down at the water and said, "The person who taught me was very patient." I asked who it was. She smiled, changed the subject to the wall clock, and I let her. I noticed her hands the same week. There was a callus at the base of each thumb, the kind you get from pulling and pushing and holding another person's weight all day. I filed it away. I did not ask her what she did. I had told myself I wouldn't press. The fourth week, a warm, slow rain came through in the evening. I was on the porch with a cup of tea and the citronella candle on the rail because the mosquitoes down here stay awake all summer. She came over from her side with a small notebook in her hand, a leather one that had the worn softness of something old, and she asked if she could sit. I said, of course. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a folded corner and slid it across the table to me. It was her aunt's journal. Estelle's handwriting was neat and small and slanted, the way piano teachers write. "Damon is the only man on this street I would trust with a key to my house," she had written on a Sunday in October a few years back. "His wife does not deserve him." I read it twice. Then I laughed, the quiet kind, the one that is not really a laugh. Nora watched me for a long moment across the wet air. "My aunt read people well," she said. "She read them for years before she said anything about them out loud." That was the week I started feeling something I wasn't ready to name. It wasn't longing exactly. It was recognition, in a place recognition had no business being. I had spent 3 years learning how not to need anyone, and this woman with her steady voice was going to undo the lesson if I let her too close. I stayed on my side of the fence more than I needed to. I made coffee at the same time as her some mornings just to hear the grinder through the wall. If you had followed her back into her house that night, you would have seen her take the hardcover book out of the top box for the first time. She sat on the floor in front of it and opened it to page 147. There was a yellow sticky note there, gone brown at the edges. The ink faded, but still legible. She had written it at 22. For the coach who taught me the water wouldn't take me. She held the book in her lap and rested her palm flat on the cover. Her lips moved. Not yet. He is just starting to trust me for real. She closed the book and slid it back into the box, and she covered it with a folded blanket. There were pressures I couldn't see yet. Carla Doss texted me one afternoon, a message I did not need. Someone in the neighborhood was asking about you and your new neighbor. I told them I don't know anything. She had never sent me a message like that before. I sat with the phone in my hand for a full minute before I put it face down on the counter. I dreamed about the pool one night that week. In the dream, I was a younger version of myself, standing on the deck holding a stopwatch that would not click. There was someone in lane 3, a shape I could not quite see, breathing out of rhythm, and then finding it and then losing it again. I woke at 3 in the morning, walked to the front window, and looked at the yellow rectangle of Nora's kitchen light through the trees. It was still on. She was up too, doing whatever people who cannot sleep do in a house that used to belong to somebody they loved. We had a small exchange over the fence the day after that dream. She was in her sandals with the coffee mug in both hands, and she said, without setting up to it, "Have you ever met someone for the first time who wasn't the first time?" I laughed and asked if she was doing philosophy or flirting. She said, "Both." I let it stand. I said to myself that night, in the quiet of my kitchen, "Miss Hallie, you be careful. It took me 3 years to learn how not to need anyone, and you're about to undo that on a Tuesday afternoon." That night I understood something I had not yet let myself say out loud. My new neighbor was not new, but I did not yet know who she was old to me, and I should have asked her before somebody else answered for her. Saturday morning of the 5th week, a white Range Rover pulled up in front of my house. It sat idling at the curb for a full minute, the way people sit in a driveway when they want you to notice they have arrived. Then the door opened, and Talia stepped out in dark glasses and a takeout coffee she did not need. She had always been a woman who arrived with props. She said, "Before I had a chance to move, I am on my way up to Jacksonville. Your mother wanted me to stop." I knew my mother had never wanted her to stop. Polite is not the same word as wanted. I let her into the living room anyway, because Osprey Lane is a small street with a group chat, and I did not want an argument on the driveway to arrive on my neighbors' phones before the coffee was cold. She sat in the chair she had picked out for that room the year we got married. She sat in it the way she always had, on the edge, as if she were waiting for a chance to leave first. She was on her second sentence when Nora walked out into her side yard with a watering can. The living room window looked straight over there. Talia followed my eyes. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice the smooth kind she used when she was slicing an apple with a paring knife. I said, "Estelle's niece. She just moved in." Talia smiled. That small, close-lipped smile I knew too well. "Damon, you are still so soft." She stayed about 30 minutes. On her way out, she paused at the door and said, "I heard the Bayshore board is meeting about your proposal again. I can help. I know Carla." My scalp went cold. I knew what she was about to do. What I did not know was that she was about to have material I did not see the 6th week from the inside. If you had been in Bayshore's back office on Thursday of that week, you would have seen Carla open the filing cabinet and pull 3 roster books. 2016. Adult Beginners 3. Semesters 1, 2, and 3. Talia leaned over her shoulder and ran a finger down the list until it stopped on a line. Hallie, Nora, age 22. All 3 semesters. Instructor, D. Ashford. She took a photograph of the page with her phone. She took another one for good measure. The 7th week I learned what a formal email looks like when it is trying to keep its hands clean. It came in at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon. The subject line said administrative notice. The body said an internal complaint had been filed, and I was suspended with pay, pending an inquiry into the transparency of my relationship with a former student who was now my neighbor. I read it twice. I read the timestamp 4 times. The neighborhood group chat had already had it for an hour by the time the email arrived. The swim coach and his neighbor. His neighbor is a former student. How long has this been going on? That night I walked out to the fence with the phone still warm in my hand from the email. Nora was in her side yard with a hose, watering a pot of basil at the corner of the porch. The sun was almost down. There was a mockingbird somewhere in the oak between our yards running through voices that were not its own. I said, not loud, "Were you my student at Bayshore? 2016. She set the hose down. She did not deny it. She said, "I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you tonight." I asked, "Did you come back for your aunt or for me?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Both." I turned around and walked back into my house. I was not angry. I was just disoriented. The way you are when you find out the map you had been reading was upside down all along. Talia asked me to meet her at a coffee shop on the bay 2 days later. She pretended to be there to rescue me. "Damon, I can fix this. I can pull the complaint. All you have to do is come to Miami with me for 1 month and tell the board we are trying to reconcile. Your program gets approved next week. This whole thing goes away." I looked at her for a long time across a table she had chosen. I said, "You filed the complaint." She smiled. "You have no proof." I said, "I don't need proof. I know you." Carla called me on a Wednesday night. Her voice was small, and it was shaking around the edges. "Damon, I didn't know she was going to take it this far. I just gave her the roster." I let her keep talking. I turned my phone over on the counter, opened the voice memo, and let it record. When she was done, I said only one thing. "Put it in writing. Sign it." I hung up before she could answer. Late that same night, I sat in the kitchen with the door to the porch open and the crickets loud. My Bayshore cloud access had not been revoked. Somebody had suspended me too fast to bother with the small things. I pulled up the old rosters. Nora Halley, 22, 3 semesters. No incidents. End of term evaluation 4.9 out of 5. Instructor comment, in my own handwriting from 8 years ago. Overcame water fear, steady progress, should consider open water eventually. I sat with the screen for a long time, and I started to remember her more clearly than I had let myself remember for years. Lane 3, always 15 minutes early, always apologizing when she blew a breath count, always the last one out, because she stayed to help fold the kickboards nobody had asked her to fold. The day she swam the full length for the first time, I clapped from the wall and she came up smiling. It was the same smile I had been seeing across a fence for a month, and I had not put it together, because 8 years and a divorce had gotten between it and me. The neighborhood looked at me differently on my morning run that week. Parents of my youngest students were sending careful messages through their kids. "Am I still going to have Coach Damon?" A boy asked his father, who then asked me in the pickup line with his eyes not quite meeting mine. Nora did not come over for 4 days. Her kitchen light stayed on until 2 in the morning every night. Mine did too, if I am honest. The fence between our yards had a small yellow gate light on it that had been out for months, and one of us walked past it a dozen times a day without ever fixing it. Talia texted once more. "Damon, women like me don't offer twice." I typed back, "That is the gift you just gave me," and put the phone in a drawer. I sat with what I knew. Talia had weaponized a truth, not a lie. A real fact, arranged with careful malice, aimed to make a small good thing look sordid. The thing she had not accounted for was that I had lived my whole life around cold water. My father used to say cold water doesn't kill anyone. Panic does. That was the night I decided I was going to stop being afraid of the shape of the truth. It was Monday of the 8th week when she knocked. I was in the kitchen. It was late. The crickets were loud again, and I opened the door. She was standing there holding a fabric tote against her chest. Her face was steady, but her eyes were red. She said, "I am asking for 10 minutes. If you want me to leave after that, I will leave." I let her in. She walked to the kitchen table and sat, and she set the bag down and took out the book. She placed it on the wood between us with both hands, the way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time. My father's copy, the long-distance swimmer's guide. The hardcover was worn at the corners, the spine gone honey brown at the edges, and I could see his blue pen bleeding through the end paper. There was a coffee ring on the back cover I remembered leaving there myself. One Sunday morning at his kitchen table, 20-plus years ago. I sat down slowly. 8 years, she began quietly, the way you begin something you have practiced saying to yourself for a long time. I was 22. I had almost drowned when I was 8. I could not get in a pool without shaking. My aunt told me to go to Bayshore. You taught me 3 semesters. You wore a wedding ring. She paused. I fell for you in silence. The kind of feelings where nobody gets hurt except me. On the last day of class, you lent me this book, and you said, "Bring it back when you don't need it anymore." I did not bring it back, not because I needed it, because bringing it back meant looking at you one more time without falling apart. I moved to Atlanta. I went to school for physical therapy. I have worked with trauma survivors for 8 years because of the way you taught me. I did not text you. I did not look you up. I did not come back to Sarasota until my aunt died. Then my aunt died. She left me the house. I read her journal. She wrote about you. I stood in her bedroom holding this book and I made a decision. Not that I was going to have you. I decided I was going to come back, return the book, and see you one more time as a grown woman. If you did not recognize me, I was going to leave the book on your porch and go. If you did, I was not going to ask you for anything. I just did not want to be hiding anymore. I am sorry I did not tell you first. Talia should not have been the one who told you this truth. I should have been. I was late. I know I was late. I sat with my hands flat on the table. I picked up the book and turned to page 147. There was a yellow sticky note there, gone brown at the edges, in her 22-year-old handwriting, for the coach who taught me the water wouldn't take me. I read it twice. I closed the book. I set my hand on top of it. I said, "Nora, if you had told me 8 years ago, I would have given this book back and told you to go home. I had a family. That would have been the right thing, and I would not have made it a hard conversation." I paused, and I let the quiet do its own work for a moment. "But you did not tell me. You disappeared. You let me be a coach without being a man being tested. You protected me by vanishing." I looked at her across the kitchen table. "That is not a lie. That is a kindness. And I do not know how many people in my life would have made the same choice." She started crying then, without covering her face, without a sound. I reached for the napkin holder and handed her a paper napkin, because a tissue would have been too soft, and she did not want soft. "Miss Hallie," I said, "do you know what my father wrote on page 92? Her voice trembled. "If you are afraid, breathe out first, breathe in after." I smiled, in spite of everything. "You learned him better than I thought." I told her what I had decided. "Tomorrow morning is the board hearing. I am going. I am going to lay out the timeline, and I am going to ask you if you want to give a statement. Not to get me reinstated, so that you don't have to hide about this one more day of your life." She looked up. "What about us?" I said, "after the hearing. One step at a time. I just got my father's book back tonight. Give me a few days to read it again with you." She stood up slowly, and I walked her to the door. My phone rang while she was still on the porch. It was Talia, at 11 at night. I let it ring. Nora's phone buzzed in her hand, a text from Carla. I wrote the statement, "I will be there." My mother called from Jacksonville at 11:05, and I picked up. "Damon," she said in her voice that had been quieter for a year, "you are doing the right thing. I know it." That night, I understood something new. Feelings are not only the ones that arrive fast, sometimes they are the ones that have been standing at your front door for 8 years, polite enough not to knock, waiting until you were ready to open it. She walked out through the porch light. I did not walk her past the steps, but I did not close the door either. I left it on the latch. My father used to say, "You don't have to choose water or land, you just have to know where you are breathing." I knew where I was breathing that night. Tuesday morning of the 9th week. The Bayshore boardroom. Wood paneling. 11 chairs, a plastic pitcher of water in the middle of the table nobody would drink from. I laid out the timeline in the order it had happened. Without commentary, 2016. Adult class. 22-year-old student who had almost drowned as a child. End of term evaluation. 8 years of no contact whatsoever. No emails, no messages, no shared social platform. My lawyer is a soft-spoken woman named Diane, who had done public sector work for 20 years, set copies of my exchange archives beside each chair. There was nothing to find, because there was nothing there. When Nora walked in and the chair called her name, she took the seat at the far end of the table and read a statement she had written in 4 minutes. No more, no less. Carla filed a handwritten affidavit admitting she had provided the roster to Talia in exchange for nothing but old loyalty. Talia was not in the room. Talia had understood correctly that her name being invoked by a paper trail would be worse than her own performance in person. The board voted 6-1 to reinstate me fully. The chair, a retired Navy man with reading glasses at the tip of his nose, looked at me over them and said, "Coach Ashford, I apologize for the time this cost you." Carla resigned her advisory position by that afternoon. The adaptive swim program was placed back on the agenda for the following month. That evening, Nora and I sat on my porch. We did not say much. She reached down beside her chair and set my father's book on the small table between us. "I am giving it back," she said. I pushed it toward her. We read it together. Page 1. She smiled. I smiled. It was the first time we smiled at the same second. 4 weeks after that, we had our first dinner inside my house. It was the first time we said out loud what we did with our days. I had never asked her, and she had never asked me. She told me she was a physical therapist at a trauma rehabilitation clinic in Atlanta. I told her about the adaptive swim program. We looked at each other across the table like two pieces of the same picture that had never been placed side by side. She said, "I could consult. Clinically, if you wanted." I said, "I want that. But have the board invite you formally. Not through me." 6 weeks later they did. She signed the consulting contract. We sat in separate offices at Bayshore and met in the conference room with minutes taken and forms filed. After hours, we walked the Bay Path in the evenings, and we were quiet more than we talked. She took my hand for the first time in the 8th week. I kissed her for the first time in the 9th week, on the porch, in a small rain, with the smell of cut grass rising off her aunt's lawn. 6 months after the box in the SUV, the adaptive swim program was approved by unanimous vote, 7-0. Nora signed on officially as the clinical consultant. Bayshore renewed my contract for another 3 years. Talia had sold the house in Miami by then and moved to a different state, and nobody on Osprey Lane asked me a single question about her ever again. The program opened with 7 students in the first cohort, 4 veterans, 2 accident survivors, and a 72-year-old grandmother who had never been in a body of water in her life. Nora sat at the pool edge on the first day and walked them through the stretches before they got in. I stood in lane 3, in the same square of tile I had stood in when I taught her. She looked across the water at me. We did not need to say anything. 1 year after the box in the SUV, we had the formal ribbon cutting for the program. The local paper sent a photographer who did not know any of the story behind the story. The board chair cut the ribbon in front of about 150 people and gave a short speech about civic infrastructure that was more moving than he probably meant it to be. Nora stood at the back, near the door, close enough to see and far enough to let the moment belong to the veterans and the survivors who had come to swim. In my small office at the back of the building, my father's book sat open on a shelf at page 147, with the yellow sticky note still on the page. Beside it there was a new one, pale blue, in her handwriting from that morning. "For the coach who is still teaching me the water won't take me, and nobody else will." We had not married. She still slept in her aunt's house. I still slept in mine. We had breakfast together 6 mornings a week. She made the coffee. I made the eggs. My father would have liked the way she held her mug, both hands wrapped around it as though she was afraid she might spill it. My mother in Jacksonville was doing a little better by then. She called Nora Damon's Miss Hallie, and Nora did not correct her. I did not either. There were small tensions I noticed but did not fight. Carla mailed me a handwritten apology after she moved out of Sarasota. I read it once, folded it into a drawer, and did not answer. A reporter asked me at the ribbon cutting if my divorce had affected the program. I said, "My ex-wife has the part she chose. This program is the part my father left me." The night of the launch, Nora stood in the doorway of my office and asked, without stepping in, "Do you ever think, if I had told you 8 years ago it would have been different?" I said, "It would have been different. It probably would not have been better." We were walking along the bay one Sunday and she said, "I used to think love was running toward someone. Now I think it is standing still long enough." I looked over. "Miss Hallie," I said, "you say that like you have been practicing it for 8 years. She smiled. "I have." There was chlorine on the shoulder of every shirt I hung by the door, and there was vanilla from the small perfume she wore, and they mixed there in a way I liked more than I would have admitted. My whistle hung by the hook near the sink. The morning sun through the living room curtain landed on the shelf above the headboard. on the exact spot where the gap had been for 8 years, and now there was a book there again. 1 year after the joke over the fence, I understood that her answer that afternoon had not been a line. It had been a promise. She had already been keeping it before I even heard it. I am sitting in my living room on Osprey Lane late at night, with the desk lamp on. My father's book is on the coffee table, open to page 147. The old sticky note and the new one are lying beside each other on the page, one honey brown, one pale blue. I have told you this whole story in the voice of a man who has already walked the full circle of it. Here is what I want to say to you before you go. Some people walk into your life carrying something you thought was gone. Some people love you for a long time before you know. And there are people like Talia, who think that weaponizing a truth is the same thing as owning the past. It isn't. The truth does not belong to whoever holds it longest. It belongs to whoever is brave enough to stand still when it finally speaks. My father said water isn't cruel. My Miss Hallie taught me a second line. Good people aren't cruel either, even when they choose silence to protect you from themselves. I once joked that my new neighbor would stay single forever. The truth is, the one who had been single forever was me, until she drove home the book I had given away 8 years earlier, and along with it, a piece of me I had not known I had given away too. So here are my 2 questions for you tonight. If you have ever quietly loved somebody in silence, because the timing was wrong, have you ever thought that disappearing might have been a kind of love too? And if that person showed up at your door again one day, carrying something you thought you had lost, would you open the door or would you close it? If any of this touched you, leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments, open the door or close it. I read every one.